Hey everybody, welcome back to Beyond the Walls. This is my interview series with members of the climbing community. I'm Pete Woods, I'm your host through this series, and today I am privileged to be talking to my old friend, route setter, pioneer, Tondé. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. I am sipping on some coffee and really happy to be here chatting with you.
Excellent, as am I. It is that time of day. You are in Seattle, so in America, in the time of the coronavirus, as I think, somebody said the other day that we are living a history textbook right now.
hmm Yeah, um, a French guy living in the US, which endlessly perplexes me.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, this is where I chose to be. The company that inspires me and hires me is here. And so that's why I'm here.
You're, you're an Englishman in New York, a Frenchman in Seattle.
Yep.
So on that note, you do work for the Building Projects. You are the director of route setting, a like a large conglomerate, three beautiful climbing gyms spread out in Austin, Seattle, and Minneapolis.
Minneapolis,
How
yeah.
did how did you? I think it's the easiest thing to start with is how did you come to be uh, the director of route setting? I mean, it's not a title that people would recognize as something that they would associate with their home gym.
Um, I think director of route setting is a job that appeared maybe in the last 3, 4 years, like has grown. It existed before in some of the larger gyms like Touchstone that had a lot of facilities, but it's just more common for, chains of climbing gyms to exist. And they find, or they're experimenting, everyone's looking for leadership around route setting. How do we create, some form of hierarchy to manage all the different layers of route setting that need to be managed? So, yeah, that's how the job came to be. How I came to be in it. I worked as a head setter for the bouldering projects in 2013 and 14. At the time, it was just the Seattle Bouldering Project. And so I worked for them for 2 years and then I left, but stayed as a consultant and continued to collaborate with them like all through the period I was living in Canada, living in France. And they continued to grow as a company. And then the role appeared, or the need appeared for this role. And they reached out to me and I was like, yeah, sure, I'll come back and try it.
You just kind of do your brain says that sounds like a good time. That sounds like the next thing. And I think for as long as I've known you, and I think we go back like 25 years or so.
At
You
least.
have at least, and we won't give away our ages. We were very young when we met, very, very young. Um, you've always been either pushing for or getting onto the next thing. So you're not someone who's afraid of progress. You're not someone who's afraid of nudging that curve a little bit, or even, I think you're fond of saying that route setting is a flat circle.
Mhm.
It doesn't have to go forward. It doesn't have to go backwards. It's not old school. It's not new school. It's just, what do we need to see more of, or what do we need to do? And it didn't surprise me when, that role came up and your name was attached to it. It didn't surprise me when you opened Oudabwat, which was, if people don't know, was a commercial route setting company whose role was to go and set in other gyms. And I'm assuming it also provides some instruction and sort of leave people with a set gym and some tools to be able to continue on in commercial route setting. And if I remember, that was, if not the first, one of the first of its kind.
I mean, it's one of those things. It's like, what was the first, of X grade at, and historically it's just hard to track because no one's really logging. But yeah, it was pretty early. I think we might have started in 2009 with, so me and two friends, Thibault Lescour, who was an amazing route setter and an amazing font climber, and one of my best friends still to this day. They both are actually Florian Escoffier, they now are the head setters jointly for the Arcos group I would say in France. I would say in Paris, but then it's in France is more accurate. And now they even have gyms in like Switzerland and neighboring countries. So they're like one of the biggest outfits in the world.
and you saw a need collectively to apply. I don't know. It's not just process. It's just to apply something to route setting that is more than the haphazard approach of volunteers, kids looking to climb for free, and just say, hey, route setting is more than just putting holds on the wall to give people a workout. You know, it was a way to expand the brand of route setting, at least from my perspective. And I'm sure that there's lots of layers to it, but that drive to have route setting be more than just pieces of plastic stuck to bits of wood. I mean, that's been in you for as long as I've known you, and I'm assuming it's been in since you discovered indoor climbing. I mean, was there a point where you went, man, this is fun, but it should be better? Or was it more organic, your sort of involvement into route setting?
It's funny because I had the luxury of being exposed to route setting in a way where it could be very casual. It was very, you know, I had opportunities to set. I had very little pressure, and my motivation and incentive at the beginning was free climbing. I was a, you know, student, teenager. I had little money, and, you know, climbing gym memberships were expensive. And so when I figured out, oh, if I set, you know, 3 routes a month, I can climb for free, I was like, I'm about that. And I wasn't, you know, I had another job, I was going to school, I was doing completely different things professionally. And it never really took, you know, it never really. So the funny story is when I have a national route setter certification in France, and my friends, Thibaut and actually Florian wasn't there because he was too young. But Thibaut, oh, and Laurent, okay, yeah, another friend of mine, they dragged me to it. I was like, what? No.
What do I need this for?
I can't set a national competition. This is not. And they were just like, come on, dude. Like, you could do this in your sleep. And Jackie, this is one of the first times I like met Jackie. And it was a week-long course. I had to like travel to the south of France and set boulders every day. You had like these tests and exams and whatever. And the whole week I was like, I'm flunking out of this. I'm like, this is terrible. In addition to that, I was like working as a graphic designer. I was not in any climbing shape to set a national comp in France. So it was just like, it was a train wreck for me. My attachment to route setting for the first 10 years of my career was very anecdotal. It was very just like, yeah, this is a fun thing. And it only came to the forefront because I quit graphic design, and it was the only other marketable skill I had. I was just like, oh, okay, well, I better do this because I need to pay the bills. And by that time, climbing gyms were like a little more serious as a business. And my perception suddenly was that my vision around route setting, it was just more important. You know, route setting had a purpose in this business context. And I was passionate about it. I was, you know, involuntarily this sort of passive relationship with it for, you know, 10 plus years. And I was just like, yeah, but I really, really like this. And it's really important to me. And it's an extension of my passion for climbing, you know. It's a means to share it. And that's what prompted, you know, the route setting company to come together and to push gym owners like, hey, you need us. Like, I'm coming tomorrow. I'm going to set boulders for you and you'll see it's going to, because that's what it took at the beginning, being very pushy. We'd send 50 emails and get 1 negative reply. Nope, sorry, not interested. And then you do it again and do it again. Because people didn't see the need. They were like, why would I pay more money? Why would I ask for someone else's opinion? I know what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
I have these gym rats that'll do it for free.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And my customer base isn't knowledgeable enough to know what they're missing. because they're not traveling, they're not climbing internationally, they're not watching competitions on TV because there weren't any. So we were happy in our bubble of, hey, we're good at this, because no one's telling us that we're not good at it. And I think the fact that you had to push for it, and you have to say, when I leave, you will realize that you did the right thing.
Well, that was the hope.
That was the hope.
That's the gamble in the I guess the business proposal we were making, is that we were basically claiming we had expertise that would improve whatever the experience of the climbers or something. I'll be very honest, we weren't always very sure we were going to be able to pull that off. It was, things are much clearer today because we've developed theory but back at that time, everyone was just kind of like, yep, this is, and we held on to this idea that we essentially thought we knew what was right, And I guess 10 years later, we're still right at least about a few things.
I would argue that you're right about most of those things, in fact. And to me, what it shows, and like, having been a gym manager, having been a bad route setter, having been around some pretty good route setting, then having been exposed to some very, very, very top end route setting, is that if you don't know, it's just kind of, I come in the gym and there's fresh routes, and then I like them or they don't. I relate to them or I don't. I fall off and want to keep climbing them, or I fall off and I don't. If you're exposed to the route setting process at all, if you knew the science that went into it, if you knew the work and the effort, and not just, today I'm just going to grab all these red holds and see what happens, then the appreciation starts to grow. And I feel very privileged to have been behind the scenes of so many competitions and so many gyms to understand. And I kind of do this to people. Like, if you saw what I saw, like, I would sell tickets to watch the process of setting boulders for an international and national level comp. And I would be like, this will be more fun than paying to watch finals, because, I spend hours and hours at a gym when I go and do comps watching that process. And it is fascinating. And I think that, the perspective that I've gained from knowing people like you who are super honest about the process. Like, you're kind of a no BS guy. And if it needs to be talked about, then it gets talked about, and the realities get talked about, and it's not magic, and it's not always right, and mistakes get made. And, understanding what the bigger picture is really important. And I think I want to talk about two things. I want to talk about 100 things, but I want to talk about two things kind of in a bit of a split. One is commercial route setting, and one is competition route setting. And the first time I met you was the perfect balance of both. So you were setting for the Eastern Canadian Climbing Tour, which was a competition climbing series back in Ontario and Quebec in the 90s.
90s, yes.
90s. We won't pick which part of the 90s. And you came to our gym and you set for the comp. And I set one boulder, and I think you set like 4 routes, 5 routes and a boulder. And it took me like 9 hours to set one boulder. And you were like, no, take it down. No, take it down. And I was exposed to this. I thought I'd set a good boulder because I've been setting in the gym commercially. And then after the comp, you set our gym basically. And the style of the routes was obviously different, but the exposure of, this is what competition route setting looks like, and this is what commercial route setting looks like. And I know I've asked you before, and you don't have a favorite, but are there some key theoretical, like non-obvious differences between, I'm going to go and teach and set a gym for commercial use, and this is how you approach a competition?
So for many years, in somewhat of a provocative fashion, I've said and repeated that, I've been asked the question, what's the difference between the two? And I say, there isn't any. For me, I approach both of them with the same sort of passion. The explanation behind that answer is that essentially one thing that I really, really love about competition route setting is the attention to detail that gets put into every hold. Essentially every hold gets discussed and processed, and a team of 4 or 5 people can spend a whole 8 hours, revisiting a boulder and chipping away at it until it's perfect. And the output in competitions that exceptional moments happen or incredible moves is the product of that very detailed and very refined process. And there's nothing particularly route setting related in this idea. If you work really hard on anything, then, the results tend to be more spectacular than something you work on for 5 minutes. That's,
but it's funny. We laugh because it seems obvious, but the fact that you repeat it to people, the fact that you explain it in that way means that it's not obvious, that there's no afterthoughts,
But it should be, and that's how it works. And one of the things that was always challenging for me was in commercial route setting, the expectation that things just had to go fast. Like, just set 10 boulders, it doesn't matter, just like throw them up and get on with it. And for me, there was a big conflict because I was doing the same job. I was creating climbing, and I was like, why would I do it one way here and another way here? And especially like in terms of proportion, the boulders in the gym are going to get climbed by, hundreds, and today thousands of people. Why wouldn't I spend extra time, a whole day, tweaking a boulder that's going to be on the wall for a month and make sure it's perfect? So all put together in my head, I just decided at some point in 2009, when we had our company, I don't ever want to change, the way I set. And the way I approach it is, there is a difference. I'm not, it's a provocative answer. The way I approach it from a process point of view is the group of people I'm setting for. How large is it? Is it 6 people's in a finals? Or is it, with an audience of X hundred people? Or is it, 300, 400, 1,000 people in a gym? And then what time do I have available? I'm, at the end of the day, just hired to do a job. And if I was paid for half a day, sure, I can put one hold on the wall and be like, I think I'm feeling, this could be wonderful. But that's not the job I was hired for. I was hired to set 3 boulders that morning. And, as long as they function, and I do have the expertise to do that. So it's just about adjusting, and being honest about it. And then I guess it's just the end goal is different. A competition, you're creating a moment. In a gym, I like to think of it more like a narrative, something that is going to last over time, that people can come back to and revisit, for the time that boulder or route is on the wall. And because of those two things, the makeup you wear when you go on stage and the makeup you wear when you go to work, they're going to be different.
There's a difference, and as there should be a difference. And it's telling that the base behind your answer is that because you're passionate about what route setting itself and what it's bringing. So the person that's climbing V2 in the gym has just as much right to be climbing good boulders as the finalist in a World Cup. Mm-hmm. So the audience is different. And as you say, I think that's a wonderful way to explain it, is that when you're setting finals boulders, semifinals boulders as well, you're setting for moments. You're setting for something that will be sort of memorable, that will separate the fields. Obviously, there's a purpose behind competition bouldering, and that they can't not all be topped by everybody all the time, because that's not success in competition climbing. But you are envisioning these moments that will be striking, that will stick with people. And in the gym, it's that the whole boulder is the moment, is the experience, and it doesn't matter how good you are. And I think I've heard you say before that your favorite kind of thing about people bouldering is if they fall off and they look like they enjoyed the experience to that point, and they get back on, now you're checking boxes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For me, one definition that really does hold true for me is that the idea of trying to create an emotion. in climbing. You know, when we go to rocks in the desert or in the forest or wherever, what keeps us coming back, you know, when we're driving home and we're like, oh, I have to come back to climb a piece of rock in the middle of the forest, is the memory of, you know, the emotion, the success, the sticking that hold, how it felt, the slipping off the hold. And it's accompanied by, you know, you're on a trip, you're with friends, you're listening to this album. All these things kind of contribute to the experience of climbing. In the gym, things get filtered out. It's not as subtle, but you're still looking to create that resolution. You know, it's an idea that's pretty strong in music. The idea how chord progressions can, you know, make you feel like, oh, this means it's the end of the song. And it's just because it's a combination of certain, I mean, it's mathematical, you know, intervals between the notes that just make it feel like, oh, this is in suspense. Oh, this is resolved. And I think in climbing, there's a similar idea where people can feel, you know, engaged with these plastic puzzles. And when you feel engaged, when you're playing a video game that's at the right level where you lose, but you know you can do it. It's not just like the boss is destroying you and you're not getting anywhere and this is just not fun. You like peek out and boom, you're dead. No, that's not fun. But when it's like, oh, I get to fight a bit. I get to, oh, I made a mistake. It was me. And you feel like you're in control of the narrative somehow. I think that's where there's engagement. And the trick is to just create, you know, opportunities and openings for people to feel that. And it's not easy because there's so many different type of people. There's so, you know, one person's easy is another person's, you know, challenging, or and in very complex and sophisticated relationships, it's really not black and white. So that's what, you know, route setting sort of crystallizes for me. The difference between competition and the gym is, I guess, the context, but the substance of it is still the same.
And I think that your analogy or your parallel to climbing outside and you know, by the time you're packing up your bag, you're thinking about when you come back and you're thinking about what you're going to do differently. Man, I know I should have put my foot on that crystal and I didn't, and it's getting dark and I'm coming back tomorrow. And that emotion, and you think about it in the car and you think about it at work the next day until you can get back there. I do think that people do that in gyms as well. Mm-hmm. So people that spend most of their time climbing in gyms, and we're at a place now where that's quite normal, is that people are exposed to climbing for the first time in a climbing gym. They might climb years in a climbing gym before they go outside, depending on where they live or depending on who their peer group is. They bring that experience into the gym, and there's an interesting break in that the boulder will be there for eons after you and I are gone. Mm-hmm. The boulder problem in the gym will be gone on April 9th. Yeah. So you have this sort of, you're fighting against this timeline where you're like, I got to get back to the gym, and I mean, people spend as much effort and they expend as much effort on boulders they enjoy and routes that they enjoy in climbing gyms as they do outside. And if you apply the importance of what you're doing or what route setting as a whole is doing, you're allowing people to have that experience where, as you say, it's not just, you know, frustratingly difficult or awkwardly difficult, but you've given them a space in which they can grow and be a little bit more successful and realize that, you know, on the first 20 tries, I was mad at the boulder. And then on the next 20 tries, I was like, okay, I get it now. It showed me something. I've learned a movement. I've learned a little bit of something. And like, people legit get excited about sending boulders in the gym. And because gyms are so prevalent, and because now you have this ability to say route setting has a purpose to bring that experience that we all grew up with and lots of people have, and put it indoors and expose it to more people. So you get to bring that to people. And like, the rewarding side of being passionate and good at something. I mean, I've seen you watch people climb your boulders, and you just have this like, I did that, I built that, you know, and it must contribute to the longevity. Like, you're still doing it for this many years later, and maybe route setting found you, right? It was, you know, you didn't seek it out from the very beginning and say, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life, but you're still doing it and you're still growing it and you're still being progressive with it. So, I mean, it's resonating with you.
It is. And I think one of the things I like the most about my job is how ephemeral what I make is. If I look back at like, oh, well, what have I built? What have I done? There's not a single boulder, like right now in the world, there isn't a single boulder set by me. It's just like, there isn't any. But at the same time, you know, that's why, you know, my sort of my focus or my emphasis is it's about these moments. It's about these memories that stay with people. Because the truth is the boulder doesn't matter. You know, the boulder never matters. It's the story that we build around, and that's true indoors and outside and indoors and outdoors. Yeah, you know, it's like, it's when a route was done, why it was, you know, who you were with or what conditions it was done in and what it meant to you at that time. And, you know, the boulder itself it's just a piece of rock. It's just a piece of plastic, whether it stays or goes. Doesn't, you know, it doesn't have to be a monument to the moment that you did this thing or, it so happens rocks are when you walk back under, oh, this was my first 7A or, you know, but what comes back is internal. It's unsubstantial. It's, oh, I was with Bonnie. I was with, you know, this person. And I think that's kind of why climbing counts. Climbing matters, you know, like it's why it's okay for me to not be a doctor, not solving cancer. What I do does have a purpose and does have a reason to exist in the world that is, it's useful, you know, in terms of social interaction, in terms of people's self-growth and, you know, discovery. And especially people who discover climbing in urban areas, it can be a thread or a path for them to discover the outdoors to which, you know, so maybe it's just me making excuses why I'm still at, you know, 40 plus doing this little hobby, but that's what I believe in, you know, and that's what I put at the center of what my route setting is, what the teaching I do is it really matters. It really counts to me. And it's important because now climbing gyms are big social hubs, you know, and
Dude, climbing absolutely matters. And I love that you put it that way because we, as a group of people that participate in a sport, and I was talking with my wife about this, you know, sort of last night. She said, well, what makes climbing different? You know, why would you separate climbing out as being, you know, lucky or privileged to be included in this community of people? And I explained it as if you play soccer and you go to a soccer tournament, you might travel to another country. You'll experience the culture of that country to some degree, but you will travel with your team. You go to dinner, you play, you go after, you go to dinner, you play, you get on the bus, you get on the plane, you go home. Most of us, when we travel to climb or even just go to the gym or our local spot, have the opportunity to be exposed to other individuals who are doing the same thing. Mm-hmm. And because you are in a small group or even solo, you are, if you're at all open to it, you will be included in that group of people without a blink. And mm-hmm. now you're being exposed to their knowledge and the sum of their climbing history and the sum of their personal history and the sum of their, you know, we're talking today about culture. Mm-hmm. And now what you've done is through a sport is you've grown your view of the world in some way, maybe a small way, and maybe not every time you go climbing, but if you're open to it, and somebody's visiting from another country and you bring them and you're like, you know what, hey, why don't you come to my house? Everybody's coming to my house for dinner. And I know lots of people who have lifelong friends that they met on a road trip and they might see each other every 10 years when they're in the same town for the same amount of time, but they absolutely carve out that time when their paths cross. And I've never had that. And I've played a lot of sports and I've never had that experience. I mean, I don't even remember the names of the people that I played hockey, baseball, soccer with. And dude, I remember a lot of people from climbing. And so, yeah, climbing absolutely matters. And I want to pin that for a second. So I want to come back to something you said just before that. And you said that there's none of the boulders that you've put up in gyms Not a single one is still up to this day. But all of the moments that they created are, and I think that that is definitely, I mean, it's really, really important. And I think if somebody showed you a scrapbook of, you know, if you had the ability to see every boulder you put up and every person that climbed it, I mean, you'd be overwhelmed with the experiences and the emotions that people were putting on those boulders. And I mean, I worked in a gym that you set in, and we just called it the 5-9. That was it. We just called it the 5-9 because it stayed up longer than any other. We cleaned it on the wall and we took it down, and people came in and were like, where is that red 5-9 on the column behind the desk that Tondé set when he was here last year? And people lost their minds when we took it down because it was the best route they'd ever climbed. So the experiences that you are creating through your, non-lasting substance is a really interesting mix, because people that create normally get to hold up what they create. Artists, musicians, whatever that creative outlet is, and you create these non-permanent objects that exist in memories, but and photos and videos and stuff like that. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just interesting to me. I mean, there's no question in there. It's just this is something that is part of who you are in some way. I mean, it speaks to you. Otherwise, you would be like, I hate this. I want to do something that I can point to.
Yeah.
I want to build.
Yeah, I don't care. I don't need to leave a trace like that in the world. It's just to leave, people a little happier or a little wiser or a little more engaged. And I don't even need to know how, I don't need the detail. I just need it to be something positive, even if it means, well, your footwork is not good enough to climb this slab. It's hard, but it's the truth. So
Failure can be positive, right? Like how much, what do we learn more?
mm-hmm.
We learn when we fail, or we learn when we succeed stuff. And I think route setting teaches us a lot of failure lessons over our life. I mean, I've definitely fallen off more boulders than I've topped in my life. So I know.
Yeah, for sure. And if we think about our climbing experiences, a lot of the time is spent failing and learning, and I think maybe as a community, we don't embrace that quite enough as much as we should, because it's really a very positive thing. But
it's sort of that climbing evokes a lot of emotion in people. As an individual sport, you are left with your success and failure. It's on you. It's on you every time. And there is an absolute reality in it. People climb at one gym and don't climb in another gym. So we're segmenting our climbing population, and there are people now that have started climbing in gyms in the last 10 years, where you have these beautiful facilities with yoga studios and coffee and all that, who might sort of think that this was always the way. There's just less of them. But do you think that there's an advantage to having come up through climbing in the era that you did? Has it taught you anything about the growth, like watching the growth of the sport and contributing to it, that you think you would have missed out if you were starting now?
Yeah, I think it's a nice idea to think that. And I lived through an era of climbing when it was different to what it is now. But I think it would be it's different. And it made, for sure, maybe it made it easier for me to perceive certain things, or because we were a smaller group of people, because gyms were different, because I think it's a privilege. I was lucky to be exposed to, I lived in France, a place where there was a lot of history around climbing, and, be it in the Alps and the mountains, or just like the crags where, new grades were pushed. And I was on the tail end of that. Like, those stories kind of had ended by the time I was engaged with those crags, but it was recent history. So, I got stories. There were people around who were there at the time. And so I feel like it was a privilege, but I don't think it's anything special, because then it's like saying, well, you know, any great climber from today, or any great route setter from today can't be as great as I was because they weren't exposed to that. And I don't think that's true. I think this, you know, people will build their own histories. Their privilege is that it's easy for them to access things. They can get stronger way quicker. They can learn way faster. Isn't that a privilege that I would have liked to have? I'm not an exceptional climber, and I never was. And part of it was the tools I had at my disposal. I lived in cities where there was one gym, and it was really, really far away, and I couldn't go, or, you know, one or two, or it was too expensive. Or today it's like, it's easy. There's a gym right there. There's another one over here. And maybe it would have been better if I was, you know, a kid in that environment. So no, I think, you know, different, certainly different times in history, and the climbers that are produced are, they're the fruit of their era. And I do think understanding the history and educating, you know where you've been so you know where to go. I think that idea is one that deserves more attention, you know. And I think through the climbing gyms, educating people, providing stewardship, providing, you know, context as to why this sport is at this point and it hasn't always been that way, has a lot of value. So just making people aware of things. But I don't think it's also like just to help them open up to a future that we don't know yet. So yeah, and that's why I try to stay, you know, humble and open to different styles and different, you know, what do we include? And I'm a little bothered by this idea of like, oh, what do you think about old school moves versus new school moves? I'm just like, it's climbing. Like, I don't care. You know, I enjoy it. There's value in it. Some will fade out and some will, you know, some are just cool trends, like, you know, like a pop song. You listen to it for a summer and you're happy to hear it. And then other time, and then it's gone. And others are albums that follow you for your whole life. Okay, great. But I don't feel like, you know, we need to pass too much judgment over all these things.
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up, because I was gonna wedge it out of you anyway, because I know that you're not a fan of people like picking away and saying what's better, what's, you know, is it better the way comps were set 10 years ago, and this parkour, you know, explosive triple dyno coordination movement is a bunch of BS that has nothing to do with climbing. And I know that you hate that, and I'm glad that you brought it up, because it is climbing, it's movement, and competition especially is about testing athletes. And we got to a point where climbers got so good that if you made the holds any smaller and any farther away, they would be impossible. You know, people just train for what's available to them. So you can continually throw little hiccups into professional climbers by giving them something that is not in their training plan. It doesn't mean it's better. It doesn't mean that the holds that we made 25 years ago were better. It just means that they were different. And if you can expose people to different styles of movement, then you are giving them a richer experience. And that's your job, is to not be judgmental about what's better or what's not better. And it's the experiences that you had made you the route setter that you are. And they cannot be discounted, as you say, regardless of when that would have been. But you got to experience shady little rickety 45s and, you know, 50,000 square foot bouldering gyms in your, you know, in not even your whole history of working in the industry. So, I mean, all that to say that, I mean, I agree with you. I think that you are very thoughtful in the way that you approach climbing as a whole, the importance of it in the community, the importance of your role in it. And I think you sometimes joke about your unimportance in your role of it. You're like, hey, they're just routes. Like, anybody can put routes up, but the ability to create those experiences is really important. So you also mentioned you were never that exceptional of a climber. And I'm going to take that to be sort of technically, you were never, you're not climbing 515,
Mhm.
but you set boulders that are very, very difficult. I think a lot of people are interested in knowing how good of a climber you have to be a good route setter. Um, and is it about understanding the movement? Is it about being physically strong enough to reach the holds? And your experience teaches you a lot about who you're setting for and what's going on, but how good do you have to be?
Um, a few years ago, the IFSC tasked me to create an evaluation system for um, commercial route setters. How do you say, well, this person is a better, more proficient route setter than this other person? And it forced me into this process where I had to think about, well, what does it take to be a good route setter? And there was a moment in time where essentially the stronger you are, the better route setter you are. That was the equation. And it wasn't entirely unfounded, because if you were that strong, it just meant you had spent that much time climbing. And at the time, it also meant climbing outside. So what you had as your baggage was probably pretty vast. And so although it was kind of an incorrect equation, it did sort of even itself out because of who climbers were at the time and how the culture worked. Today, I have worked, in gyms all over the world, and I've worked with people who are not strong climbers, and yet they were incredible route setters. And I was like, how do I account for that? How do I create a system that allows for people to not be judged solely on the quality of their ability as a climber? And I think your question is especially timely because the gym industry is in desperate need of more route setters, because they're opening new gyms everywhere. So they need more setters. And it's kind of great. A lot of young route setters have opportunities. But another thing I'm seeing is a lot of these young route setters have very little climbing experience. They got strong. They can climb V9 or V10 because they climb inside, because they have a moon board, because they have fingerboards at their disposal. And I don't mean this in a negative way at all. Like, they're strong, good climbers. But at the same time, creating climbing also requires a culture, understanding movement and the various flavors of discomfort or awkwardness that can exist on rock and that contribute to the level of, or the challenge of, a boulder or a move. And those connections, the relationship between climbing level, climbing ability, climbing baggage, also will define the output of those route setters and climbing gyms in the future. So it's kind of tricky to evaluate, figure out how do you say someone is a better route setter than another. And for a few years, I think it faded out of the importance of how strong a climber you are, faded out because there were other things that were more important. One of the issues I'm facing in hiring route setters today, and the current team that I have, is because kids between the age of 12 and say 16 or 17 can actually go into being double-digit climbers very easily with climbing gyms today. And what that means is the output of that gym, the boulders that are in the double digits, we just need more of them, because there are lots of kids now in the gyms who are like, hey, I've climbed everything in the gym, I need something harder. And that means we have to produce more hard boulders. So level matters, climbing ability matters. Climbing culture matters. All of those things matter in different proportions. For me, the solution to that is a team where you have some people who are stronger climbers, some people who are well-traveled trad climbers, some people who are, actually beginner climbers, because having that connection to not knowing how to climb is also important. And then a strong communication in that team, and that's what produces the best climbing. So embracing difference is a really cool idea. It takes a lot of humility, because it means you have to understand, I can't do this. I wish I could. I cannot hold this hold. I wish I could, but I just can't. He can, she can, but I can't. Adversely, on this move, I can stand on this foothold like it's easy, but she can't, he can't. So, and that's also another layer of processing of information to manage as a team to produce good climbing. So it's kind of complicated, because it means that our strengths and our weaknesses contribute to the climbers that we are and the climbing that we produce. So yeah, climbing, that's probably the most longest winded answer to the question, like, how strong do you have to be?
But it's the right answer, because the answer is that it's, in some instances it's irrelevant, and in some instances it's very relevant. And if you are, I mean, if you're a solo route setter and you're the only route setter in your gym setting boulders, then you need to have a pretty good understanding of what you're good and not good at, so that you can at least sort of temper your, I'm just going to set glorious V8s and everything else is going to be trash. You need to grow your ability to see movement in different ways. But if you're setting as part of the team, which is the norm these days, it's about being humble. It's about listening to someone else's strengths. It's about saying you have to have that variety in experience. And that is what will get you to a place where you're saying, okay, this group of people can set wonderful boulders across, a really wide range. And I know that you teach that course, and I've listened to it and I've peeked in on it when you came and did it at our gym. And the route setters that walked away from it are, I mean, you think that people who've been setting for years, what are you gonna teach me about the thing I already know how to do? And I think people are just like, what? This is someone who's put 100 times more cognitive effort into something that a lot of people think is quite simple. It's a mechanical act of putting these holds in this order. But that's not how you approach it. You're a creative person. You're a graphic designer. You're a music lover. You're an art lover. Like, is it a creative outlet as much as it is I want to make things difficult or not difficult? Like, it's the line between creativity in design, I guess, the aesthetics of a boulder and how it climbs it's not always in parallel. Like, you can have aesthetic boulders that climb terribly, mm-hmm. and you can have sort of quote unquote ugly boulders, mm-hmm. that have beautiful movement attached to them. How do you solve that for yourself? Like, when you want to create a beautiful boulder and it just doesn't climb the way you want it to, what happens when you butt up against your own internal monologue?
I mean, it depends on the context. It depends on the job. Like, am I supposed to deliver a boulder? And then there is such a thing as, is it good enough? There's a moment where, you wish it was something else, but the truth is, this will provide people with the experience that they want or need. And lots of the boulders that I've set, I hated or was unhappy with for whatever reason. Sometimes I couldn't even explain that reason. And people came up and told me that's my favorite boulder in the gym or in the comp, and I'm like, okay, great. That's the value in it, and it's not. So, and vice versa, boulders that I thought were amazing. And there's a strong correlation with boulders I really like and boulders that get 0 tops in competitions. Which there's a small club among international route setters who are pretty highly ranked for 0 top boulders. Everybody has some, but it's always kind of a funny and interesting story that we're attached to things that basically don't work. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's I think it's dependent on the situation. Like, if you have the luxury of taking it down and exploring and experimenting and learning something from that process, great. If you don't, then you just have to live with it. And because at the end of the day, like, being an artist and being a creative is is wonderful, but we're still doing a job, you know. And that's, I think, the way, the means I've found to temper it is to say that, you know, route setting is a design, is in the design family. And in design, you have a deliverable. You have a, you know, you have a date and a time at which the building needs to be finished. And you can't be like, well, I don't know where the windows go for months and months, you know. And that's the difference between an artist and a designer. A designer has to deliver. There is a strong creative element, but in that process, yeah, if you don't, if there isn't a thing at the end, you don't get paid. So
yeah, and you, the stubborn attachment to something simply because you thought you liked it at the outset doesn't serve you very well in that process. And you
yeah.
need to listen to people's opinions. You need like someone sort of saying like, man, it's just like either leave it, it's good enough, or and pull it and start again. You could tweak it forever, but I mean, every now and then you get stubbornly attached to an idea and you spend just enough time on it that it produces something wonderful. Like it has to, there is a balance. And I guess, I mean, the funny thing is that I don't think there's a single question I could ask you in this arena that would yield a yes or no answer, or like a not an answer that wasn't situationally dependent. It depends on the person, it depends on the gym, it depends on the moment, like all of those things. And there's not a lot of black and white in route setting other than tops and no tops.
Sure.
But even that is not that important always.
I think maybe of all those questions that, you know, have no black and white answer, I think maybe the most misunderstood one is difficulty itself. Like when you say, oh, this is V8, what does that even mean? You know, because as climbers, we simultaneously hold on to the idea that V8 is a very fixed thing, and it, you know, I will know for sure what that is when I encounter it. And at the same time, we know full well, we've been outside and climbed 3 boulders that are V8, and there is no way in hell that they're the same grade. They feel so different from one another. So it's very paradoxical. And that's an idea that I've been exploring as somebody who produces climbing or produces challenge that has to have different levels, is what is the nature of difficulty, you know, and how do we measure it, or how do we build it to meet the expectations of people, you know, in a positive way, or in a competition in a challenging way.
And so now you've layered philosophy into mathematics and design. Like this is the conversations. This is why I want to expose, you know, the people that I have reach with, is exposing route setting for all of the layers that it has, because I do think the longer you talk about it and the more people that you talk to, you understand that it's not simple, and its importance is, I mean, it is arguably the most important thing. Yes, you have to physically build a gym. You have to put up the walls. You have to have a desk. You need to exchange some money and rent some shoes to people. But you need to put holds on the wall over and over and over and over and over and over for years. And it is the essence of everything we do indoors. So the importance and understanding the drive that some people put into it, and the passion that some people put into it, and, you know, the fact that you're so driven, and that you are, I would say you're an excellent teacher. I think you're a fantastic teacher. I think you're really good at teaching people movement. I think you're good at teaching people route setting. And so now you're getting to expose a wider group of route setters that it's more than just grind it out, put a bunch of boulders up, and you get to explain and hopefully embark a few more people on the journey that has taken you to where you are, and then in a way that you get to think about route setting in a much broader sense. And we talk about its importance, and we talk about all the way down to the details of, I could spend an hour deciding if this foothold needs to be 6 inches to the left or 6 inches to the right. And that comes from really caring about something. You can't sort of drift by and then be able to, you know, look back and say, oh, I really cared about that. You know, it's that it makes a huge difference. Like, I think that you've set all over the world, and you've been in gyms all over the world. And I would argue that everybody you set for wants you to come back. And I think that that speaks to the fact that it's the product, but it's also the process, and it's everything that goes with it. And I know that you don't roll into a gym, put up a bunch of boulders with your blinders on and your headphones and then roll home. I know that you talk to people. I know that you take the time to talk to them about climbing or whatever questions they might have, because you are an educator, I think, in our sport and through our history. And I think that's really important. And I think people should be exposed to the amount of mental and physical effort that goes into good route setting. And how do you, other than teaching 100 clinics a year, I mean, you must have pondered the idea of how do you get more exposure of the process instead of just the finished product?
I think the first thing is there's something I care about more than route setting. It's climbing. Like, route setting is cool, but at the end of the day, it's just a process. It's a job. It's the thing I really care about and I'm passionate about. And the reason route setting is important is route setting is my medium for sharing climbing. And that idea is really really important to me. And that's why good route setting means producing good climbing. And that is what engages people. That is what matters. That's what makes the connection. And then as far as sharing it, I think for me, the next logical step is all of the ideas that have developed and crystallized around in the industry around route setting in the past 10 years, which I think have been, there's been a lot of evolution. People have progressed a lot on understanding what counts and how to do things better. And there's a lot of people out there, thinking about it, pushing it forward. A lot of headsetters in gyms. There's a lot of gyms that stand out on the global map, and they stand out for a reason. There's a person behind it, pushing these agendas. And I think the next step is these ideas that are really valuable now and processes that really work have to be shared with people who are not route setters. Because again, it's back to the effort of producing good climbing is a team thing, right? The experience of being in a climbing gym is, of course, the climbing, but then if the music is not good, that's it can be a deal breaker. If it's dirty and the light is bad, if the people at the front desk are, not pleasant. So all of those things contribute to, and that's true outside as well. When you go on a climbing trip with the wrong group of people and you're not vibing with them, you hate it. It's not cool. It's, even though you're climbing in one of the best crags in the world, it's possible to have a bad experience. So I think the next evolution for route setting is, for lack of a better word, it's a form of maturity. We've learned about ourselves, grown, and have, there's still some steps to be taken, but it's starting to take shape. But now we have to have a conversation with the rest of the people who are evolving around us, to include their intake, to share with them ideas. And if it becomes a more concerted effort, the experience that people will have coming into climbing gyms will be elevated. So it's difficult. I wish the answer were, I think a lot of route setters wish it were like a very technical, very route setting focused thing, but doing anything very well at very high levels involves a certain amount of collaboration, being open, sharing ideas, and accepting the criticism and feedback and praise of, other departments who are not route setters. And this is, these are lessons from my professional experience in in other fields. You know, when you're a graphic designer and you create a poster and you think it's, you know, the end all of beautiful posters and the lettering and the coloring and the typography and everything is so wonderful, and someone from marketing says, yeah, but we can't read the date, we don't even know where this is happening. You know, there's something to be said for that. And to be able to find middle ground between those two things, create something that's beautiful but also communicates a message and, you know, gets people psyched about whatever this event is going to be, then you're doing a great job. And I think that's where we have to evolve, and we're still kind of in little bubbles, trying to like break through the surface to connect with other teams. So yeah.
But the thread is climbing.
Yeah.
And the thread will always be climbing.